Good evening, everyone in India, and good morning, everyone in the US. My name is Arjun Malhotra. I am still waiting for. I see Gopal. He's on now. We were just waiting for Gopal to come on. Hi, Gopal. How are you?
I'm doing very well, and you guys are at 8:30 in the morning, isn't it, or 7 o'clock in the morning?
For me, it's about 7:15 in the morning in California.
Well, thanks for adjusting everything. I don't know how you want to do this session for our viewers, but I thought it may be a good idea if maybe I could make some opening remarks, you could make some opening remarks, and then we can just have a sawal jawab or a jugalbandi.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Why don't you start, Gopal?
So, there's a lot of technology in this conference, rightly so, but we have got an unusual title that we aren't short of ideas. There's a question mark there. I just want to express in a few minutes my perception sitting in India. I think Indians are hugely creative. I'm not saying this to pat each other on the back, because I think you become creative when you're faced with unforeseen and enormous obstacles. I don't want to get into the Jugaad conversation at all, but you do have to find a solution to it. And so people are creative. They're constantly looking for new ideas. So I would answer the question by saying we are not short of ideas in India, but we are very short on execution. And a lot of this conference is about being creative, finding new technology solutions. And I just wondered whether we could have a little banter. I want to take some examples from the public domain. Obviously, it's not good to talk about it in terms of a particular company. India has great ideas for strategy, and they are articulated with great flair and good, good words. I'll take 5 of them which have not worked very well, and I'll take 5 of them which have worked reasonably well. Just to say that there are successes as well, and there are some not so greatly successful. The purpose of my mentioning these is not to debate whether I'm right or wrong. That's not the point. In any country, in any organization, some will work and some will not work, and it's important to find out what is common amongst the things that do work. Let me take the 5 that are really not really worked very well. It is almost 40-50 years since Garibi Hatao was brought in. It was brought almost 60 years Since they said Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, but you know what's happening with Kisans even now. Make in India, which is a more recent sort of slogan. Ease of doing business in India. Doubling farm income. These are all terrific ideas, creative. Whether they have worked well enough, either it's too soon to say, or you can say that, they've not worked too well. But let me take 5 which have worked very well. And not perfectly, but worked well. Swachh Bharat, Narega, the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, giving cooking gas to people who got their eyes steeped up in chula smoke. GST, though it is having some issues right now, there's a great deal of work that the late Mr. Jaitley did on GST. And the whole IT and telecom, which has helped India to get into the technology era. So I sat back and, since I lived through all of these in India, said, what is the difference between these two? And are there some broad ideas one can derive, which we can use for a discussion today? The first one is, whenever we have mobilized mass opinion, and this can apply to a company, it can apply to a nation, mass opinion in favor of that change, and that requires time, then it works well. The second one is, you must have a very good planning system, not just announce it and do it, and then find yourself with obstacles. Planning systems for devolution or for technology. And by the way, technology is a huge help now because it cuts through the bureaucracy and the adipose tissues of the system that we are operating in, and helps us to, just for a moment, we have to learn. We are a rare country, a bit like the United States, but raised to the power of 3. We have very great diversities, and we have to learn to resolve our differences of ideology and opinion through debate and listening. And wherever that has been done, it has worked well. We have to affix responsibility and accountability. These may look like motherhood statements, but if you take the center and the state in a national situation, it happens in the US as well, but that's no consolation for me that the center and the state are working with different ideologies and they don't have a conversation. That's rather recent. If I put these measures together and say, I want to say creativity and innovation in terms of idea generation and strategy is king, but execution is a slightly bigger king, especially in an emerging market. And I wonder how it is that we can, in this country, take the technology boom that's going on right now and get better at the discipline of execution. And since Arjun, you have run a business here, you've been in India, you've been in the US, perhaps you can talk to this point, because I think we've got a great enablement now with technology, and we don't seem to have the discipline sufficiently well. This is not a bald criticism, it's a way of saying how can I improve better, and India's problems are very urgent. We have great ideas: one nation, one ration card, one nation, one tax, one nation, one election. But these are ideas, and I think it's important to figure out how to make it happen and whether it can happen. We are such a diverse country. You know, if you look at the history of India for the last 5,000 years, we've always been a decentralized society. But if you try to centralize it and run it as one, United States hasn't quite succeeded in that, at least in my opinion. And Europe has been trying it, it has not succeeded. So there is something about the way of execution that we need to relook at. And I would very much welcome your ideas, especially the application of technology to improving execution of very creative population. Thank you. Over to you, Arjun.
Thanks, Gopal. I completely agree with you that we have lots of ideas, but our implementation or execution is just not where it should be. And, it's especially relevant to the IITians who are at this conference. Basically, I deal with a lot of potential startups or startups. People come to me with some great ideas and I get really excited. But most of them are technical ideas, and the people who get them have very little go-to-market kind of strategy or knowledge. Or the assumption at a very simplistic level is that if I have a great technology, people should line up at my door to buy it or pick it up or use it, and that is not the real world. The go-to-market becomes really important. I think what you mentioned at a macro level, at a country level, I completely agree. I think we do need to.
By the way, if I may interrupt you, that applies to company level as well. I just took the country level because everybody can understand what I'm saying. If I take the example of company A or company B, the context may not be that clear, but please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. When you talk company, you talk of a company that's large. I was talking more of startups because, one of the things you mentioned is to carry everyone along. And I think, even in a startup and as companies grow larger, communication and everyone aligning behind a communication becomes really important. I mean, I know that when a company is small, you can call everyone into a room, tell them something, and everyone walks out and everyone's clear on what is to be done. As the company gets bigger, you find that it takes you a long time for people to understand what you're saying. I've so often it's happened to me that after a few years and doing a presentation every week with the same slides, an engineer will come up to me and ask me a question that I find, hey, but I've been talking about it for the last few years. Haven't you understood it? And why didn't you come up before? So I think that's very important, aligning everyone with what you're saying. You might be saying something, but communication in organizations, in companies, and probably most likely in the country also tends to be understood differently by different people. And that's the reason why I think having that dialogue and having that communication so that everyone is somewhat clear becomes really important. I also think as we hopefully come out of this COVID-19 crisis, going forward, a lot of things are going to change. Normally we expect technology to make the changes, like the internet came and changed a lot of things. Cloud has come in and is changing a lot of things. I think after a long time, at least the first time in my lifetime, that you're seeing a pandemic come in, and that's going to change the way we do things in different industries. It's going to impact different parts of the economy very differently. And as we come out of this pandemic, I think you're going to see a lot of changes, and we're going to see we're going to need and see a lot of ideas that are going to come in and to take advantage of this change. And I think, again, I agree with you. The execution, the implementation becomes really, really important. I think, the other thing I'd like to mention is that execution in countries like India or in a continent like Europe is far more complex than execution in a country like the US, which is somewhat more, it is heterogeneous, but it's somewhat more homogeneous than either Europe or India, which is really like and is a subcontinent. And so, it's not that one strategy fits everything, or something that works in Punjab and Haryana may not work in Telangana or Tamil Nadu. And so you've got to change your strategy, adapt it depending on what you're doing for some of the local requirements that come up. I think that's one of the big challenges that we see in India. And it's something that you've got to live with, even when you're in technology. And the way it's looked at and the way it's done, it's just completely different.
Arjun, if I may just pick up on a point you just made, that in your lifetime, this is COVID-19 is probably the biggest thing which is going to change things, not only in India, but perhaps in all over the world. Talking from an Indian perspective, there was a crisis which didn't touch the common man, called Y2K, about 20, 25 years ago. But it has given India an industry which is bigger than the steel, automotive, and electricity generation industries all put together. And the founder of that industry, if I may use that word, Mr. Kohli, passed away only recently. We must doff our hat to him. Now, when I think back and say, we always tend to make a hero out of the one person, but there are many, many soldiers who fought those battles. What did the early pioneers do in the IT and software industry? They did exactly what you were just saying, that we didn't just say that here is a quick opportunity, let's do a quick jugaad. Probably some of them did a bit of it, or everybody did a little bit of it. But Kohli brought in, to my knowledge, he was the one who brought in the idea, followed by Ramadurai, that you can make a factory out of it. These are repeatable processes, so that the human element is taken out, and every software coder doesn't sit and try to do a better one compared to his predecessor. And if you see the challenges that we face after COVID, many of them are going to be technology-led solutions. I'm leaving out the political arena because that's not the subject of our study. And in that technology-led, how much of reducing the human element and increasing the technology element can India take a benefit of? For example, people talk of machine learning and artificial intelligence. If you apply those to Indian situations, while it's easy to give a talk as to what all it can do, I'm trying to think of something of scale which India can do using the human element a bit lower and the technology element a bit higher. What is your view?
Yeah, so I think, just to stay on those technologies also, although I would also add robotic process automation. And while everyone sees that like they saw IT in the old days as something that's going to take away jobs, whereas look at what IT has done in terms of creating jobs. I think robotic process, so I'll come back to AI and ML, but robotic process automation is going to make my, let's say a BPO operator far more efficient. It's going to, and so what we can do, the same person can do a lot more work and get a lot more revenue for the company. What will happen is, there's enough work for probably millions of more people to come in. And as you get more efficient, your cost benefit with people in other parts of the world becomes better. And so you can actually go in and get more business. So I think important thing is robotic process automation is actually going to make people more efficient and get more done. There's we talk about delays and everything in India, whether it's in the government area or in other areas. If I can make people more efficient, I can cut down those delays just as a start. And then obviously more things can get done. Now on AI and ML, I'll give one simple example. If you look at what's happening in India today in the healthcare space, and I'll talk about healthcare because it's top of mind for everyone. We have because of the economy picking up, the number of people coming into who can afford to come into the healthcare system is going up by some 12 to 18%, depending on how the economy picks up. But the number of doctors is only going up by 6%. And if I need more doctors and I invest today, I'll get them only 10 years later,
Sure.
right? But the patients are going to keep going up. And every doctor I know, at least in India, is fairly overworked. They work till late at night, start early in the morning. I just don't know how they manage, but they seem to do that. Now, this is going to get a lot worse over the next 10 years at least. And so I have to find a technology that will allow my doctors to spend less time per patient and still be as effective. And that's where something like AI and ML can play a major, major role in helping. And we are starting to see those applications come out in India. Telemedicine has given it a big boost. So telemedicine, as you read it, is just a connect between the doctor and the patient who is remote from the doctor. But actually, when you put intelligence behind it, I can do some level of diagnostics. I can do some of the triaging. I can actually give the doctor kind of analysis of what I think the problem is with the patient. And I see companies that save doctors 30% of their time, that as the technology gets more refined, will actually get better and better, especially in certain disciplines. So
but Arjun, if I may,
yeah.
I just want to ask you, since you obviously studied this subject quite a lot, if you see where the doctor's time goes, now I've not got a study on this, I'm using my common sense and my observation. And why patients have to wait for long is because of the conversation that he has with the patient. He has to almost extract what exactly the symptom is, because there is literacy, communication, language, many other factors that come in. Now, it is very important, especially in a society which is in an emerging market like ours, to have that human touch. The fact that he will save a lot of time because he still has to spend most of that time, I would think 60-70% of the time, in having a chat with them and finding out how will technology help that.
Yeah, so let's say you talk about the first interaction, and I won't get into that discussion, but let me assume the first interaction with the patient is the same. Then the patient goes away, and let me assume he has a chronic disease, like a heart problem.
He comes back every time.
So what we do is monitor him when he's away.
Right.
So instead of the doctor asking him what happened during the time you were away, we can now give the doctor the data so that he can get to the point quicker and spend less time with the patient. So just as a simple example.
I understand. That's a very, very clear and simple way to explain it. Yeah. But tell me, do you think in a period of 50 years, if all this is done successfully in India, US, what are the signs you see in the US? Will it take away the human element from the interaction?
I'm not sure. 50 years is a long time. I'm not sure for our generation and maybe our children that they would be comfortable with something like that. But I think when we look at our young grandchildren, and if they grow up in a system where technology and they're using emojis, they're using a language that's not really English to communicate when they send messages around, they might be a lot more comfortable talking to a robot to get analysis than you or I would be, because we are mentally so used to having the personal touch, basically. In fact,
so you're saying the diffusion of the technology may take a bit of time, but the technology will definitely be primary in the way the diagnosis and the discussion takes place.
Yeah, and it's already starting to happen. So, if you look at technologies where you're not human facing, say radiology, for example. So today, using AI ML application, when I give them a X-ray, and if I fed millions of X-rays into the system, and the system has learned from the analysis or the analysis that's been done on the X-rays, it can today point out. It has a memory of those millions of things that have been fed in, compared to a doctor who could probably hold 10, 20,000 in his head. It can actually point out relevant areas in the X-ray where the doctor should look for a particular problem. And so because that's not patient facing, that's already happening. And it's just that the radiologists have to get used to it and feel comfortable with it. So it's a smaller audience, and it's got a logic to it, it's technology, and you're starting to see that happen. And so slowly—
Arjun, I want to pick your brain. We got only a few minutes left, 5 minutes left, on a matter which is to do with execution. When I see the startup world in India, of course, it ranks number 3 or number 4, the number of startups and amount of VC money it gets. I don't know if I'm old-fashioned. Maybe I'm allowed to be at my age. I feel that if you're a good tennis player, you must get to Wimbledon or French Open, or at least the national championships. There must be some markers. Getting an IPO is very important metric for a startup. Now you can take, there are people who've taken 5 years, there are those who've taken 30 years, there are those who've never done it at all. I find that of all the startups in the last 25 years in India, I'm leaving out the TCS and the Infosys because they are a bit older to be called a startup. Probably you can count on your hand how many have come through an IPO stage. And when I talk to people in the venture capital startup industry, I get a pushback saying, that's really not a criterion. What is your experience?
So, today most startups are looking at what they call a strategic exit. That means someone's a big company that's public or whatever to buy them out. I don't think most founders want to run a public company. Running a public company has its own headaches. Full transparency, quarterly predictions, managing investors. I don't think a lot of people have that appetite. And given a choice, I think personally, I would not do it. I would rather run a private company than run a public company. And so, my advice to startups is actually going an IPO is like getting married. The real problems start after that. It's not like dating, which is a lot of fun, right?
So you're saying it's okay for an entrepreneur to raise VC money, build it up rapidly to the point that is marketable, dress the bride and dress up the girl and find her a partner.
Yes.
Sell her to somebody and just go. Yeah. Then later on, when people talk that there's great emotion that I had to part with this company, I created this, that's a bit of bull, is it?
No, it isn't. It's like having a daughter getting married.
The metaphor is not wrong. The metaphor is not wrong.
Yeah.
You have to get her married, so you get her married, but it's still a very emotional experience.
It is. Starting a company is like bringing up a baby. It's somewhat the same. So, when you have to get another company to get get back to being what they call a serial entrepreneur. Most entrepreneurs like startups. They don't like running companies. Most of them don't like to, companies that get above 100 million require a different kind of skill. You've got to run them differently. The processes are different. The back office is different. Everything is different. And so a lot of founders don't like to do that. They prefer to have another startup than actually run a big company. And, and I can relate to that because to some extent, I also feel the same way.
So I suppose there are enough VCs, the market is broad enough to almost simulate a public market, is it, in the United States?
Yes, there are enough large companies that fall behind on innovation and development. And some companies like Cisco make it a kind of a strategy to buy smaller companies that do things much more innovatively.
And is there any data published as to what these larger companies do after? How do they digest these little smaller companies? Is there any public data? Because they now become divisions of a much larger company.
Yeah, I don't think I haven't seen any public data, but there's a lot of research data as to not all of them are successful. Not all of them get absorbed and integrated properly. So there's a lot of articles, let me put it that way, on what makes M&A successful, what doesn't make it successful, etc., etc. And the way some of these companies work is, obviously the big ones you have to make them successful, otherwise you have a problem. But if you do a lot of small M&As, it's some
Gets
work,
in the
some
wash.
don't work. Yeah, some work, some don't work. And
so
again,
to come back,
it's like a VC. If 10% of them deliver the result that they give you, or some percent, 10 might be low, it's a workable strategy.
So to summarize, since we got a signal to wind up in the next 2-3 minutes, what we are saying is whether you're a VC, whether you're a startup or a mature company or a whole nation, don't underestimate the importance and the power of execution. Point number 2, the rules for being execution as a discipline, we have briefly summarized, and I'm sure many management gurus have written much more about it. And the third you're saying is execution applies very much to startups. And let them not think that it's a creative idea, though unfortunately the reality may be different. We'll have to train people to think of execution. Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that. I think they have to look at putting a team together that will help them go to market a lot more successfully than they are doing today.
Interesting. Well, thank you very much, Arjun. We've had a good conversation, and apart from the pleasure of meeting a good friend all over again, I was having some difficulty getting in, but now that I've got in and we've had a good conversation, that's very nice.
Great, Gopal. Lovely talking to you. And I wanted to thank the audience. Thank you very much.
Okay, take care and have a good morning.
Well, you too. Have a great evening.
And wait for the Prime Minister to join you shortly.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Bye bye, Puneet. Bye.
Thank you very much for the talk. It was very informational, and a shout out to all the entrepreneurs. And they gain inspiration from you both. And we actually didn't introduce you two because you really didn't need any introduction. And we really loved your chat. Thank you very much. We on to our India's Prime Minister's talk now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a good
Bye.
day.
Bye.
Thank you.